Mediation seems like such a big, scary word, but it's really not. It may not be fun to be in the same room with the person you don't want to be married to anymore, but it's so much better than going to court emotionally and financially. This week on the Starting Over Stronger show, we're going to explore what the perfect mediation appointment would look like with popular podcast host and attorney mediator Susan Guthrie. If you have a mediation in your future, you will want to tune in.
Welcome to the Starting Over Stronger show, where you'll find help and hope for your divorce survival and recovery. Divorce well, live well.
Welcome back to the Starting Over Stronger show, and thank you for joining us again for more help and hope as you go through divorce. Today, I welcome to the show Susan Guthrie. How are you, Susan?
I'm great, and thank you for having me, Annie.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about who Susan is and what makes you an expert on mediation.
Well, I think I probably would go back to 32 years as a family law attorney, which gives me a really layered understanding of divorce, but also I'm a divorced person myself, a remarried person, and my current husband is the divorced father of triplets. So I'm the stepmother of triplets as well. So I have a lot of experience in all areas of divorce, but I transitioned to becoming a mediator and using that as my sole way to help people through divorce in the past 10 to 12 years, just because I think it produces a better outcome for people.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's just start with a definition, and I'll just say your definition of mediation for that listener who doesn't even know what it means. It's just a foreign, scary word.
Yeah, and it's a great question because so many people do misunderstand what mediation is in a family law setting. It's really sitting down with a neutral third party who is skilled in facilitating a conversation to help the couple work through all of the issues that are attached to getting divorced, things around their finances, obviously, as well as around parenting their children. I think the key factor is, unlike many other methods in mediation, it is the couple themselves who have total control over making any agreements. The mediator, what many people misunderstand is that the mediator is not a decision maker. The mediator is a supporter and a helper and a facilitator to help them make the decisions, but they make the agreements themselves.
Yeah, excellent point. And how many sessions of mediation do most people need? Obviously, that varies, but
yeah, that can vary widely. That's another thing I would say is really up to the couple. And they don't control each other, which is always one of the issues in any divorce. They want to, but part of it is how ready are people to sit down and tackle some of these topics because they're tough. The things we need to talk about in a divorce, I just mentioned them, your finances and your children. It's hard to come up with two more difficult topics to talk about. And it really matters how ready people are. And that's emotionally, financially, psychologically, to sit down and work on that. So you can have the simplest divorce take a very long time and a large number of sessions. And you can have a very complicated divorce go very quickly if people are really prepared and motivated to move forward.
So one of my questions was going to be who decides how many sessions of mediation are needed. And that really does come down to the two parties involved, right?
Yeah. I mean, the beauty of mediation is from start to finish, it is 100% voluntary on the part of the two participants. And when I say two, I mean both of them. They both have to agree to metaphorically come to the table. So it's not like litigation where we can strong arm somebody into participating. And if they don't choose to participate, yay, we're going to go get whatever we want from the judge. Right. In a mediation session, if both parties don't come to the table and want to play, then it's not going to happen. And it's the same thing. It's not just deciding to go to mediation. It's deciding to stay in mediation, to continue to work in mediation, and to continue to do what needs to be done to move it forward and make those agreements. So it's an every session requires an agreement and a dedication on the part of the parties.
Well, so many people probably wonder whether or not their attorney will be there. What determines that?
Again, it all goes back to it's up to the parties. Many people think and choose not to go through mediation because they think they won't be supported by an attorney, that it's an attorney-less process. And that's not true. In fact, I highly recommend that everybody going through mediation, unless you have the simplest of divorce cases, really you should consider having what I call a consulting attorney. But whether you want your attorney to be in the room with you or in the Zoom mediation session, so to speak, is really up to the two parties to decide. There are positives that we can discuss about why you might want your attorney there. And there can be negatives because it does tend to bring a more separate adversarial tone to something that it's hard enough to sit down and talk about these things. When people get positional, it can make it a little more difficult. So it is something that we discuss with the couple from the very beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you said we could get into some of the positives and negatives of having an attorney there. Would you mind sharing just one or two?
Yeah, no, great question, because, some of the positives are when somebody is feeling very hesitant about making decisions. We see this often in a mediation session where we will go around and discuss things, but they are not ready to what I'll call pull the trigger on making a decision because they don't feel supported. They don't feel like they are confident enough in their own thought process, emotional content, whatever it might be. So having their attorney there, holding their hand, giving them support, giving them legal advice, which is what we do in that context as attorneys, that can really help that party who needs that support to make that final step to make agreements. And that can really help things because the other person who may be more ready, more able to make decisions, may start to feel frustrated with the process if the other party is having a hard time making those decisions. So that's a very positive situation. It's also in cases where we have complicated issues. I'm doing a mediation right now that has attorneys on both sides, and we have some complicated matters around the children, and we have some complicated matters around their finances. And so it's very helpful because we're talking about really complicated, difficult legal matters in some of these instances. It's just really helpful to have the attorneys there in the moment, and we're all talking about the same thing at the same time, as opposed to telephone tag or email tag, which is how things tend to play out when we don't have everyone together.
And typically when you are acting as a mediator for a couple, and would you say that most of the time those people come represented by attorneys, whether or not they are there, or do people sometimes initiate a process of mediation like as a DIY divorce kind of situation, like you're the only legal representative involved?
Yeah. So we are actually seeing a lot more of people hiring a mediator at the beginning of their process and working through the process directly with their mediator. And again, they may have counsel on the outside that they go and consult with on an as needed basis, but that they don't have coming with them all the time. Now, I should make clear, even though I happen to be an attorney and a mediator, one, you don't have to be an attorney to be a mediator. Many of the best mediators I know are therapists or have financial backgrounds. A lot of CDFAs get mediation training. When you are a mediator, even if you are an attorney, you can't give legal advice to either party because you're a neutral. Right. So they do need to, in order to get that layered information, they do need to have those outside professionals to go to. So I don't really think of a mediator as a legal professional. I think of them more in that neutral role. But yes, and COVID really gave a big bump to people seeking out mediators as a way to move through their divorce because the courts have been closed in large part. Many of them are back open or at least operating at some capacity. But if they were overworked before, they are so inundated at this point in time. I honestly don't know when the court dockets will catch up to what's going on. They were looking for alternatives.
Right.
And mediation, especially because it can be done online. In fact, I've been an online practitioner for 7 years. So long before COVID ever hit, they found that that was something they could do even during COVID to move their process along.
Now, what would you say about utilizing mediation in place of legal representation for a couple that is high conflict? There's a lot of conflict involved with their situation. Is that better to try to mediate without attorneys, or is it actually not a great idea?
So I would say, well, first, one of the myths that I often hear is if it's a high conflict case, it can't be mediated. And I do want to dispel that right off the bat. High conflict cases are actually very well suited to mediation because, unfortunately, the legal process can be used as a weapon in many cases where there is high conflict. So I would much prefer to see people in mediation. The key is that you have a mediator who is skilled in handling a high conflict mediation, because the way you approach a high conflict mediation is pretty much the opposite of how you would approach what I'll call a more common level of conflict. You know, there's almost always some level of difficulty for everyone in their case.
Right.
But I will also say to that I think it's a very good idea in those cases that people have legal counsel. Now, do they need them in the room? Again, not always, but it's a very good idea that they have somebody there who's able to give them legal advice. I will also say that I think it's an excellent idea for the person who is dealing with someone who is a high conflict personality or the more conflictual partner. So the party who's less conflictual, I guess I would say, that they get a coach and have somebody, not just an attorney, unless it's an attorney who's well-versed, but there aren't that many out there. Having a coach who can help them deal with not only the high conflict personality, but what happens and what's different about a high conflict divorce is almost a necessary. I would prefer not to mediate a high conflict case unless that party has a coach.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I appreciate you saying that. I know that certainly you've already mentioned the mediator does not necessarily play a legal role. They play more of a facilitator or maybe almost a therapeutic kind of role where you're just trying to facilitate positive communication and decision making. But is it because of that mediation is not actually legally binding? So when you go into mediation, you may feel like, oh, we just agreed to everything. This is great. And then it kind of unravels in the days to follow. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, nothing is legally binding until it's written down and signed by both of the parties. That's called a contract. And in family law, that contract has to then go in front of a judge to become a court order, right? So no matter which way you go through the divorce process, you still have to get to those two final stages for it to be legally binding. So if you sit down in your attorney's office and negotiate over the telephone, through email, at a 4-way conference, negotiate a settlement through attorneys, you sit down in a mediation, you go to a collaborative divorce meeting, however you get to an agreement, that agreement does not become legally binding until it's written down, signed by both parties, and put in front of a judge. So the difference, I think, is really more which method are you going to use to get to that agreement? Because statistics tell us more than 95% of divorce cases will settle in some fashion. We have a very small percentage, less than 5% of cases actually go to that trial that everybody sees in the movies and thinks is the norm. It's not even close to the norm.
Right.
And you don't want to be one of those cases, folks, at all.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what method are you and your spouse going to use to work your agreement out? And then no matter which one you use, when you get to that agreement, you will end up having to go through a process in the court to make it legally binding.
Excellent point. I was going to ask, since it's not legally binding, why is it even a good route to go? But I mean, you really just answered that, because you have to get to point B somehow, and you really just have to make up your mind. And I think the thing is, you have to understand the different options. And I think so many people have no idea that they have options. They only know call an attorney. They don't know they can hire a coach. They don't know that they could use a mediator. They don't know about collaborative divorce. They have no idea that there are options. And different ways of getting there.
Yes. No, I love that you say that. Wonderful.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
That's
Because
why I'm out here talking about it all the time. Exactly.
Right. And you can't make that decision if you don't even know what the options are. So that's really what the Starting Over Stronger show is all about, is just educating people that you have options and you need to know what those options are in order to facilitate the best outcome for your divorce based on your unique situation. So, well, this episode of the show is titled The Perfect Mediation. So let's deliver on that promise. Take us through the perfect mediation, from planning to execution to follow through. What is it that would make it the best circumstance for everybody involved?
Well, I think it starts with taking that moment. And this goes back to what you were just talking about choosing your process. So many people, when they make the decision to divorce, and we know what a tortured journey that can be. So when they finally get there, it becomes almost a race for people. And they're like, they want to jump into the process. They start making knee-jerk decisions, such as, I call an attorney and that's how I get divorced. So in that moment in time, a perfect mediation or a perfect divorce would start with taking a deep breath, finding out what your options are, and exploring different potential avenues. Because what you're really doing in that moment is setting yourself up for the journey through divorce and then your life beyond it. Because the way your divorce goes is how your life after divorce is going to go. So if you have a horrible, contentious, adversarial divorce, your post-divorce life and co-parenting is going to mirror that or get worse, which I've seen 32 years of this. I have seen a lot of that. I can see that you've seen it as well. I see your face, right? If you take a moment and choose the process that's going to work best for you and your spouse, the journey that will honor your family, allow you to restructure, allow you to retain control, allow you not to bankrupt your household, whether that be, mediation, which does tend to be less expensive and less adversarial, whether it be collaborative, whether it be sitting down, like some friends of mine just did recently at Starbucks in 5 different meetings and working through most of it. Probably your worst knee-jerk choice is just to run to attorneys. And remember that that's what I am. And I'm saying that. Yeah. I am a divorce attorney and I am telling you not to do that. So perfect mediation or perfect divorce would start with taking a pause, making some reasoned choices. The other would be, I've said it once, but I'll say it again here, is you would get a coach. Both parties would get coaches. I think coaches are a very important part of the process, especially in those early days, because you need to get your emotional content under control. Because no matter which of these paths you choose, if you go in a highly emotional state, you are not going to be able to work through your divorce. And you keep yourself caught in that horrible divorce limbo of, I don't know what my life looks like anymore. It's horrible. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what the future looks like. And a lot of that is your own inner turmoil keeping you there. I always advise people, get a coach, take some time to think. Don't hire the first professional attorney, mediator, collaborative professional that you meet. Vet people, get the team together that's going to work for you. And then when you can take that deep breath and sit down at a table and be reasonable, whether it's an online table or a conference room table, and really, think about what you want your future to look like. Look forward, not backward, and start moving in that direction. I know it's hard. I know it's scary. I've done it myself. I help people through it every single day, but that is what's going to get you through. So whether it be mediation or collaborative, or even adversarial, if you pick the right attorney, I really think you have the control to have the perfect divorce or the best divorce possible.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's fair to say that, yes, there are still always only 2 decision makers in every divorce. However, it may be that one party, like we talked about earlier, the high conflict issue, which I'm sure is pretty prevalent in the divorce arena.
Oh, yeah.
And so you may be that person sitting here listening today going, yeah, I would love to do everything that you're saying, but I'm only one of the two decision makers and the other one isn't on board with being reasonable. And so what would you say to those people?
So that's where you have to shift your approach in dealing with that person. And my number one advice is always Bill Eddy, Bill Eddy, Bill Eddy. When it comes to dealing with high conflict people, getting divorced from a high conflict person, mediating a divorce with a high conflict person, Bill is and always will be the gold standard. So the first thing you need to do is run out and get yourself Biff. You need to run out and get yourself Splitting, and you need to get his new book, which is called Mediating High Conflict Disputes. What Bill has done so beautifully is broken it down into really simple. I mean, like Biff and EAR, which is empathy, attention, and respect in using, he gives you easy tools to manage that high conflict person. You're never going to control them and you're never going to change them. Mm-hmm. But you can manage their high conflict behavior to a point where hopefully you can make some headway. And if you can get a good mediator in there as well, who knows how to conduct a mediation, which is the difference is just a little tidbit here. A high conflict mediation is really locked down. Like we're talking about this one topic. These are the options, and your answers are yes, no, or I need to think about it. You don't get into these far-ranging, how do I feel? You're so mean. It's not going to work. You have to keep it locked down. And so you need a strong mediator for that, and you need to be strong. And you can't. This is why the person dealing with a high conflict person needs a coach, because they can't go off into the emotional abyss as well. So, but you can do it. You just, Bill Eddy. That would be my answer.
Yeah, I have 2 of those 3 books on the bookshelf right behind me. So I totally agree. I probably make my clients so frustrated when I say Biff again and say, are you doing that right now?
Yeah.
No. But that being said, obviously we know it is easier said than done, but I love how his techniques are capsulated into these little digestible pieces like Biff and EAR, because then when you're in the heat of that moment and you catch yourself, you can real easily go back to, and all you have to remember is Biff. And then you can remember all the parts of that. And it just kind of helps to ground you in those situations. And so I think that's incredibly important.
Are you getting the support you need as you divorce or face the possibility of divorce? Did you know that for just $55 a month, you can be a part of a 1-hour weekly support group call of people just like you? Some haven't even filed yet, but they know the marriage is not sustainable or healthy. Some were served papers they didn't want. Others are feeling empowered that they finally took the reins of their life and hired an attorney and a divorce coach to help them navigate the uncertain waters of divorce. All of them are facing fear, grief, loss, confusion, and pain, and they're finding help and hope in a Starting Over Stronger support group. You can get registered today for a group at startingoverstronger.com/groups and start this week in getting the help you need to divorce well and then live well. Remember, divorce is hard. Life after doesn't have to be, but the support you get now is what makes the difference.
When you get to mediation, hopefully you're utilizing these tools. What actually makes for a productive mediation? And I will say, from my own experience with it personally, what I loved that the mediator did, which I don't know if you do, I'm assuming this is probably a pretty common thread, but he had us he had a whiteboard and he had us write down and start with all the things we agreed on already. And that was such a great motivator because it was like, oh, wow, we agree on so much. So then when we got to the 2 or 3 things that we already knew we were there to deal with, it was like, it just sort of fed this, okay, well, if we can figure out all of that, then we can figure this out. And so is that a typical strategy?
You just gave away one of our mediator secrets. Well, and it's an important one because so many people walk through the door thinking they don't have anything they agree on. And one thing I'd point out to them, if they're walking through the door or Zooming into a mediation session, they've already agreed on one thing. to come to mediation.
Yeah.
And the next thing they almost always will agree on is that they love their children and they want to come to an agreement that's best for them. Mm-hmm. So even if they don't walk through the door, I applaud you that you walk through the door with some agreements. Not everybody does, but we may start with them on just those. You agreed to mediation and you agree you both love your children and you want what's best for them. And that's important because people need to remember that they do have those commonalities and they have common goals. I mean, that is a common goal that you want what's best for your kids. And we can get so positional in a divorce. You know, it's all about who gets what and who keeps what and who loses and who wins. And in the end, really your common goal is not that anyone win or lose when it comes to your kids and things like that. So absolutely. And using the whiteboard, or because I work online, I use Jamboard, having people work on things like that where they're working together to build something. That's also a team building kind of approach, right? Why don't the two of you tell me what you've already agreed to? Now you're working together.
Yeah. And I think they need empowered too, because you get so lost in all the emotion of it. You don't realize that what you're doing, if you opt to put yourself in a situation where you end up in trial, is you're handing over the decision-making to somebody that doesn't know you. And I don't think they think about it. I don't think they get that far in their thought process to even realize that's what they're doing. So that's probably something you mentioned in mediation, if need be, is that we want to get this figured out here because we want the two of you to make these decisions. We don't want to hand that off to a judge. That's a very empowering realization, I would think.
Right. It's actually one of the biggest benefits of mediation is entirely a mediator is never going to step in and make a decision for people. It's just not going to happen. And again, I was a litigator for 24 or 5 years of my practice. I've seen judges make decisions. Trust me, people, you do not want a stranger in a black robe making decisions about your life. You just don't. We don't run out into the street and ask a stranger to tell us what to wear that day or, you know, what should I eat for breakfast? Why on earth would we want to have some stranger tell us how to raise our children or how to spend our money? And so unfortunately, I think this all goes back in time to the fact that we tend to treat, because marriage is a legal status, we treat the end of a marriage as a legal process. And it is, we have to dissolve the legal relationship, but we handle it in courts as if it were a car accident or a breach of contract or any other lawsuit. It's party A versus party B. And it's all about facts and winning and losing. And that can be fun for the attorneys. I'll be honest with you. You know, those of us who enjoy speaking and talking on our feet and thinking fast. And, you know, that there was an enjoyable part to the drama of a courtroom, not from the party's perspective. It's your life that's playing out in that small space in front of those strangers. So that is always something to remember, that control means you also have the control to put a stop to all of this and just come to those agreements that are going to end this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the only thing that propels people to get from mediation, maybe feeling like a failure, to ending up in a courtroom and handing over that decision to the judge, is believing the lie that the judge is going to take their side. That doesn't work.
It does not happen.
No.
It does not happen.
Yeah.
You know, somebody just said, I was doing a training the other day and one of the attendees says she always tells her clients, there's no just in justice. You know, there is no justice in a family courtroom. It's not about that. The judge is not looking to make you feel better or to punish anybody for being a bad person. It's just not how the system is built up. And so, yes, everybody always thinks that I'm going to go in there and I'm going to tell my story to the judge, and the judge is going to say, oh my God, you poor thing. I cannot believe you've been
Give her
living
everything
like that.
she wants.
Exactly. Never has happened in my 32 years of doing this. So it has happened in mediations. Can I say that? I've had people walk away from a mediation feeling that the settlement they arrived at achieved for them as much of what they wanted as was possible.
Yeah.
I've had people walk out of mediations arm in arm. I've had people hug at the end of mediations and feel like they just did the best job they could possibly do for their kids. I didn't get those reactions when we walked out of a courtroom.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. So when we're in mediation and we're going through that process, having that conversation, your role, obviously, as a facilitator or mediator is to allow the two parties to conduct whatever conversation needs to happen in order to arrive at some potential agreements. Do you kind of sit back and let them work it out, or do you have them more direct their comments to you and you direct your comments to them, kind of more isolated or more individually, you mean?
I would say it depends on the couple, but ideally, I would have them talking to each other. Okay. Because that is another benefit of mediation is, reality is most people, by the time they get to divorce, their communication skills with each other have taken a bit of a hit. And they are not usually communicating all that well. So a benefit of mediation is that you have a third party there who's one of our roles is to kind of help you start making shifts in how you speak with each other, communicate with each other, talk about your kids, all of that. So that as you go forward, you walk out of the process hopefully in a better place to go forward. And we do that in a variety of different ways. We suggest different phrasing for people. We coach. We will repeat back what someone said, but we will frame it differently, maybe a little leaving out some of the, you're such a jerk, this is all that I'm willing to offer.
Any expletives?
Like yes, we usually leave those out as well. So that works better that if they're working together and if they're speaking to each other. If they're talking to me, it's as if I have a role in the room in their agreement, and I do not, right? Yeah. It's their agreement. So, but there are times, and again, it comes down to that higher conflict where it's better for them to talk to me than to talk to each other, because then at least I can filter. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're in the same room and sometimes we're in separate rooms.
Yeah. And you know what I like about what you said is that you're actually helping them to create the concept of possibility, because probably up until this point, they haven't felt like it's possible to make any decisions or come to any agreements with each other. And you facilitate that in such a way that I'm sure at least a good percentage of the people that come through your doors leave there going, wow, we actually can figure things out. And maybe that sets them on a path to a better post-divorce relationship than they would have had otherwise. So that is the hope. And ultimately, that's how we're helping families restructure through divorce, not just that parenting unit, but it's really their children who benefit from that. Because as we know, right, it's the conflict between parents that is what causes issues for children. It's not your divorce. Yeah. It's how much conflict you have between the two of you. And that conflict arises in many cases because of very poor communication. People get caught in the repetitive and hypnotic cycle of conflict. You're such a jerk. No, you're such a jerk. No, this, and they go back and forth. One of the things we're trying to do is interrupt that and teach new patterns. Yeah, absolutely. So as they conclude whatever progress they've been able to make in the room with you, I'm sure conversation turns to, okay, what's going to happen now after this? What does follow through look like? And how do you prepare them for the fact that everything could change when you leave here, that this isn't binding? How do you help them to maybe try to stick to those agreements if possible?
Yeah, well, part of what we do is we make sure that when they do come to an agreement, they're buying into that agreement. What I don't want to see in a mediation room is a, yeah, sure, fine, I'll do that someone then walks out the door and changes their mind very quickly. And we do see that in certain cases. I do everything that I can, including saying to both of them, one thing I want you to be very aware of is be careful when you make agreements. Because remember that in this time in their lives, they usually don't have a lot of trust for each other either. And so if you in the room say, I agree to that, and then you leave the room and change your mind and don't agree anymore, you are further undermining the trust. Mm-hmm. So a conversation that I have with people early in the process is that by building these agreements piece by piece and moving through the process together and then living up to them, They are actually recreating trust, rebuilding trust, and reestablishing their integrity with each other. And it's a very important part of the process. So that's an early conversation and a constant conversation. We also do write everything up. I actually will pull up a Word document right in front of my couple and start not writing their agreement, but I will type up an understanding of what they just agreed to. And we all look at it and we all agree that's what they meant. And then that will go to their attorneys to draft their final agreement.
Yeah, I like that. And what you're describing is a safe place because you're basically inviting them to be 100% honest. If you don't agree, don't say you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it would be better that you didn't agree right now than that you say you do and change your mind later. I love that.
100%. Don't say yes unless you mean yes. Say, I'll think about it, or I need to think about it, or I want to go talk to my attorney about it, or I need some time to digest that idea.
So do you actually look for clues that they're kind of saying that they want to agree to something when they really don't, and pause at that point and say, I'm reading that you're not really truly in agreement with that?
I might not challenge someone that directly, but I might just I've had people say, agree to something very quickly that may not actually be workable if we really look at how it's going to play out over time. And so rather than challenge it, I might say, okay, so Stephanie, let's just assume that you do agree with that. What does that look like in a year? I'm curious. To you, what would that look like? Getting no support. What would that look like in a year? How will that play out? I call it playing the movie forward, reality testing. And often that will cause someone to sort of take that step back. Because you do this is something that's really, I have an episode myself on coercive control coming out. Very often we have relationships where if it doesn't rise to that level, we still have that power imbalance. And so it's a natural part of their dynamic for one person to suggest and the other person to agree.
Yeah.
And I have to sort of feel that out as well and see if that's happening. And if it is, I'll probably separate them, because it's easier for me to work with her, if it happens to be a her in this example, to do that playing things forward than to do it while the other person who's the more dominant partner is right in the room. Because ultimately, I want them to come to agreements that they will be able to live up to. Because all that's going to happen if she agrees and then doesn't live up to it is he's going to just get angrier and angrier, and their conflict cycle will continue.
Right. So they can actually have mediation in two separate rooms and you just move back and forth between the two rooms.
Yep. We call it, going. Shuttle diplomacy or caucus style separate meetings. I would love for them to be able to talk with each other. Again, that's how they're going to make changes. Right. But if it's not possible, the goal is to help them get to an agreement that they can live with. And so I'm willing to work with them in a variety of different ways to hopefully get them there. And sometimes people need that space.
Yeah. Does it ever transition in the middle? They think they're going to be together and you just discern pretty quickly that's not working and you suggest separate?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. More now, I will say, before I transitioned online about 7 years ago to an online practice, it's much less common because people are able to tolerate more in an online setting because they are physically safe. When I was in person, doing in-person mediations, it was a little more common. And sometimes you'll do it because one topic is just too emotional for people. It can be a variety of different things that really emotionally get to someone. So we might do that separately and then work back to getting back in the same room.
Well, a lot of my listeners are in high conflict situations. So I like to approach a lot of my questions from that angle because I think it's important for people to know there are protections in place for dealing with those kinds of dynamics in a toxic relationship. So,
yeah. And a good mediator is going to pre-mediation. Most of us do a pre-mediation session with each party separately. And that would be the place to share your concerns that you feel this might be a high conflict situation. But I do really urge people to not assume that you can't mediate, just make sure you find a mediator who knows how to deal with that high conflict. In fact, Bill is now doing trainings for mediators that help them. He does one for us, and it's one of our most popular trainings because it's a skill I think any good mediator needs to have.
Yeah, for sure. And so could they just ask directly that of the mediator, are you comfortable with high conflict situations? Is that the right way to approach it?
I would absolutely ask that. And I would also ask, do you do anything differently in your process if it's a high conflict matter? Because that to me, and this is just my personal opinion, but again, a mediator, I've talked about all the different ways I will work with a couple. I'm presuming a normal level of conflict. If it's high conflict, it is locked down because that is the only way you're going to move it forward. It's very, very prescribed and it's very strictly set out how it's going to go forward. And I didn't come up with that. That is Bill's approach. And I've taken his training, the high conflict training. So I would check that. You can actually even ask if they've taken Bill's high conflict mediation training. I will point out he also does training for people who are going through high conflict. He's got an online program for that. And he has an online program for coaches that deal with high conflict. So their website at High Conflict Institute is a really good resource.
Yeah, sounds like it. Okay. Well, what final thoughts do you have for listeners on making mediation work perfectly for them?
First off, consider it at the top of your list. Really, if you are facing a divorce, look at that from making mediation your first choice. And then always know if mediation does not work out, there are other options. But all of the other options are likely to be more expensive. And the closer you get to a courtroom, the more adversarial they're going to be, which, by the way, is also more expensive. But, try mediation first. Don't assume that you have to be the most amicable. People always say they think you're sitting around a circle singing Kumbaya. That is not mediation. It's hard work, but you're going to get through your divorce faster with a better outcome, with a better future for all of you, and hopefully with more money in your pocket.
Absolutely. Well, listeners, wow, I hope you learned a lot today. I hope you took good notes. This may be one of those episodes where you need 2 listens so you can dive in again and really study what you need to apply here. If nothing else, I want to know, what one thing do you want to put into practice today? What is your next step in preparing to approach mediation from this perfect standpoint of making it work for you? So thank you for joining us today to talk about this important topic. If you have additional questions, you can always email me at Annie@startingoverstronger.com. And I will be happy to get you connected with Susan or help you explore how to get your needs met, how to find your voice and advocate well for yourself during divorce so that you can get the fair outcome you need and deserve. In a future episode, I'm going to break down what the divorce experience is like with only an attorney as compared to having an attorney and a coach. You'll want to watch for that episode, or don't wait. Book your initial consultation now at startingoverstronger.com and find out for yourself how working with a coach saves you time, stress, and best of all, money on your overall divorce costs. Starting Over Stronger is your resource for private coaching, support groups, this podcast, and coming this November, your first opportunity to invest in a post-divorce retreat, the Starting Over Stronger Recovery Retreat, where you can rest, reflect, and release everything from the past and reset for an amazing new life after divorce. If your divorce is final or will be by then, I would love to see you there. And thank you, Susan, for being here and sharing with the listeners today from your place of expertise in this topic.
Thank you for having me, Annie.
Yeah. We'll see you listeners again next week for more help as you divorce and hope as you are starting over stronger.